going to give everyone just a moment to come in before we actually jump into the webinar, make sure anyone who might be running a little bit late doesn't miss out. But thank you everyone who's here already, and we can't wait to share this with you. While we are waiting for folks to come in, I'll just say a few things about the actual mechanics of this webinar. So on Zoom webinar, we will do questions at the end. If you look at your screen right now, you should have a little tab that says Q&A. That's where you can put any questions in. If we aren't answering them during the webinar, it's because we're saving them for a live Q&A at the end, just so all of us can speak to them and address them. So that's where you can put your questions. If you, for any reason, are having technical difficulties during the webinar, you can put those in the chat. We will have someone monitoring the chat, making sure you guys are able to get anything you need during this. So yeah, with that said, let's jump in. Today's webinar, as you all know, since you signed up, is how to get hired, expert tips for home inspectors. And I'm really excited about this topic for a couple of reasons. Number one, we get asked questions like this all the time, like, a lot of people in the home inspection space, as a lot of y'all know, are the solopreneurs, so people who are out there running their own businesses. But as we've seen recently, especially a bit of consolidation in the industry, there are more and more home inspectors asking, well, what if I were to join another company? What do I actually need to get hired? How can I make myself stand out? How can I present as a great candidate? And we thought that was really interesting. So let's get into what we're going to actually cover today. I am going to, in just a moment, introduce you to your presenters, but what I'm really excited to share with you from me today is survey findings. So as we were seeing more inspectors looking to get hired, and then conversely, more large inspection companies looking to hire on inspection talent, we decided to put out a survey to some of our biggest and best inspection companies here at Spectora to learn exactly how they find great candidates, what they're looking for when they hire an inspector, and any tips they would have to inspectors who are looking to join a multi-inspector firm. So I'm thrilled to be able to share some of those survey findings with you today, and that's what I will be sharing today. With that said, I would just like to introduce Angela and Lulu, who are joining me today. So first up, we have Angela Williams from Super Inspector. And Angela, do you just want to introduce yourself, tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Of course. So I am Queen Bee at Super Inspector. And what that means is I'm the keeper of the hive. To me, that success comes from having the right people in the right place. And to keep great people, you need great culture. So I've just, one way to keep in touch with culture is I'm still involved in the hiring process. I get the joy of interviewing people at least once a week. And my main objective there is just to make sure that they fit our culture. So keeping the culture alive, that is my job. That's my role.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm so excited for everyone here today. Angela, after we share the findings from our survey, is going to basically share all of her tips and wisdom that she has from years of doing this and doing it so well. Super Inspector has grown immensely since Angela and her husband started it. So I'm just very excited for everyone here to get that knowledge from her. I'm also so excited to be joined by Lulu Brewer, who is our head of people here at Spectora. I think Lulu has had a hand in hiring just about everyone who's at Spectora today. Some of you may know her way back in her days on the chat bubble on our customer support team. So Lulu, do you want to just say hi, introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Lulu. I've been with Spectora for about 4 years now, and I just tallied it up, over 1,000 interviews in my role so far. So I've talked to a lot of people and a lot of home inspectors. I started on the chat bubble too. So one of the most special things about Spectora is our people, both internally and all of our wonderful clients. And I feel like I am so excited to marry those two worlds together on this webinar.
Wonderful. Yeah, well, we're so excited to have you here. That said, the last thing we'll do today in this webinar is just go over any questions you all might have. Myself, Lulu, and Angela will all be available for the Q&A. So we'll do that at the end. And again, in case anyone missed it at the beginning, any questions you have, you can just pop in that questions Q&A tab that you should see on your Zoom screen. with that said, let's get into it and start talking about what we learned from when we at Spectora and Super Inspector surveyed all of these larger inspection companies. So with that said, the number one thing that I wanted to know when we were asking this and be able to tell anyone looking to get hired is where you should actually be finding job postings and make yourself visible. So what we learned when we put out this survey is that the number one way inspectors are getting hired is actually through word of mouth. So my learnings from that is that if you are an inspector looking to get hired, the number one thing you can probably do is meet home inspectors and get to know about inspection companies in your area. So great way to do that is showing up to any local chapter events, like maybe Internachi, I know has a ton of local events, as does Ashi. Showing up there is a great way to make connections. Additionally to that, we've also heard of a lot of inspectors going to their Chamber of Commerce meetings. So as word of the mouth is the number one place that hiring inspection companies actually look when they're going to hire talent, we've learned that it's really important if you're hoping to get hired to form those connections with other inspectors in your area. Number two, by far, the number one place online that home inspection companies were looking for talent is on Indeed. So what I'd encourage any of you to do right after this webinar, if you're looking to get hired, is to go ahead and make a profile on Indeed. You can upload your resume, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and then make sure you're looking for any job postings for home inspectors and applying for those. It is important to note that like a couple of the people we surveyed also noted that they find home inspection talent on LinkedIn, on other job boards, sometimes just through Google search, and through ZipRecruiter. So those are some other platforms to consider, but Indeed and word of mouth are probably the number one and two ways you are going to get hired, and therefore those are the places where it's really important to be visible. The next thing that we're really curious about is like, okay, how many inspection companies hiring an inspector care about whether they have their license before applying? And I think this is an interesting one, right? Because some of you here might not be licensed yet. You might be in that process. Some of you might be in a state that doesn't require licensure, so that's something you haven't even thought about. And then some of you might have been licensed for years and are just thinking of joining someone else. So the answers between inspection companies who care whether their inspectors that they hire are licensed or not before starting is about 50-50. I think just from like our personal recommendations, if your state requires it, we absolutely recommend getting your license prior to starting your job search. Number one, it probably will make things easier for the firm hiring you. They won't have to figure out and wait for you to get your license. Which is important. And then if you're tuning in from a state that doesn't require licensure, it can really make you stand out if you are certified. A lot of inspection companies, as you all probably know, care a lot about, building trust with their clients, building trust with their agents, and becoming certified and making sure you're staying up to date, taking continuing education, all of that good stuff is very important. And it can make you stand out as a candidate to inspection companies. So that said, another question we asked was, are multi-inspection companies covering the cost of licensing for anyone who hired? So about 38% said no, they don't cover the cost of licensing. So my takeaway from that is be prepared if you do delay licensing and, for whatever reason, have a connection or apply for a job before you have a license, be prepared to fully cover that cost yourself before you even have the job. Some companies do cover licensing, and there was actually, didn't show this here, a pretty good overlap between companies who required licensing and companies who were willing to cover the cost. Some did it without reimbursement, just said, you know what, you're our employee, we're going to cover any associated costs to get you licensed. Some would cover the cost up front, but require the inspector to reimburse them later. So I think that's just always important to keep in mind is if anyone here is just brand new, hasn't started the process of licensing yet, it might be worthwhile to just think about all of that. Are you prepared to cover the cost? And are you ready to, be able to get licensed in order to stand out and up your chance of being hired? All right. Another question we had is where are inspection companies actually interviewing, right? So most unsurprisingly, have all interviews in person. I think to me, this makes a lot of sense as a lot of interviews will probably involve a component of being out in the field, but it also is, very local. You're not going to be hired on as an inspector remotely. So I think you should be prepared to show up for an interview in person with some maybe early screening calls, some interviews are remote. Only 1.7% of all the inspectors we surveyed had all of the interviews remotely. So the biggest learning from this is be ready to show up in person. That said, I do just want to touch on a couple things. Whether you're showing up in person or remotely, you should be really prepared to interview. We'll dive into some of this more later, but definitely dress in business casual clothing. We'll get into why that's important. But even if you're showing up on Zoom, it's still important to present well, to look good, to look professional. If you're in person, we definitely recommend bringing a printed resume as well, even if you submitted it digitally. And then I think these two are really important, especially talking with Angela inspired me to dig into this a little. If you are showing up for an interview remotely on Zoom or anything, it's so important to have a clear background, to have good lighting, and to show up with your camera on. The person interviewing you doesn't just want to hear a disembodied voice or be seeing you, coming to them somewhere where they can't see your face and it feels weird. It's really hard sometimes to simulate connection remotely. So those are just our few tips to whether you're in person or remote. You got to show up professionally and show up as your best self. Another important thing we asked is how important is a candidate's professional resume? And now we didn't really dive into what exactly a professional resume is. So whether that's, um, pure inspection experience that they're wanting to see or any other applicable experience. But about the most inspection companies who are hiring definitely view a professional least moderate important, some extremely important. Very few are saying, no, it's not important or it's only a little bit important. So that said, anyone who is looking to get hired today, right after this webinar, highly encourage brushing up on your resume, making sure it looks great. Just a couple tips, and I think Lulu has some resume tips for everyone later, but I just always recommend making sure your name, phone number, and email address are right at the top so it's super easy to contact you. Definitely, if you have any education, licenses, and certifications, ensure those are displayed pretty prominently because, again, licenses and certifications are some of the things that can really help you stand out before anyone gets to know your personality and how you might fit as far as like client care goes. Those are some of the things that can get you in the door with just your resume. And then definitely list any professional experience. We know a lot of people are coming to the home inspection world as their second and third careers. So from inspectors I've talked to just anecdotally, doesn't always matter whether you have experience as a home inspector, that can be taught, but make sure you're having something on your resume to show that you would be a good hire. That said, another question we asked is how often are professional references considered? And this was huge. Almost all of the inspection companies we surveyed said yes, they do consider professional references. So when you're applying, we highly recommend gathering a list of professional references. And when you do, make sure you let whoever your reference is know that you're listing them as a reference. So if they're getting a call from like ABC Inspections Company about hiring John here, they know to expect that and they're not like, well, John never told me about this. So with that said, couple more learnings to share. I think this is really important. When you think about being an inspector, probably thinking a lot about technical skills, right? Like how well can you actually inspect a house? How well do you know all of the systems of a home? But when we surveyed large inspection companies, the top 3 skills all had nothing to do with the actual home inspection. So far and away, the number 1 skill that inspection companies look for in inspectors they hire is communication abilities. So they highly value your ability to communicate probably internally, most importantly with a client, and that's huge. And that's something I would definitely recommend listing on your resume to stand out. Second is ability to learn. And I think Angela and I talked about this a little bit, but so important. A lot of home inspection companies are smaller shops. They might have their own way of doing things. And it's very important that you're able to learn, get on, adapt with how they do things. So that's something else some of these larger companies are looking for. Last but not least, very similar to communication or people skills, a lot of companies looking to hire or looking to hire someone who can actually converse well with realtors, with clients, and that's an important part of the job. So I thought this was super interesting. I hope some of you all agree that this is kind of fascinating that the top 3 skills listed had nothing to do with the actual ability to inspect or technical skills. Couple other learnings we did ask, since it's really important if you're showing up to an in-person interview that you're dressed appropriately, what companies hiring or expecting candidates to wear. And far and away, the most prominent answer was business casual. So even if that isn't what you would wear in the field, it's likely not. We recommend showing up to an interview in a button-down shirt, slacks, and nice shoes. A big exception to the rule that Angela and I talked about a little bit, and we also saw noted in our survey responses, is if you're interviewing from the field or coming directly to an inspection, yes, it's probably okay to still be in your inspection clothes. Just make sure you note that. Tell the company, I'm showing up dressed like this because I came straight from doing XYZ. And it just has to have that communication piece. But as a rule of thumb, business casual is what to wear to an interview. Then lastly, just wanted to touch on a couple sample interview questions that I prepared. So we asked all of the companies we surveyed what kind of questions they're asking in the interview. And unsurprisingly, there is a huge range, but I was able to distill them down into a couple categories that I think are really important to think about before any of you embark on an interview process. So number one is questions that larger companies are asking when they're bringing on a home inspector is what actually makes you want to be a home inspector on our team? So with that said, we'll dive into this more later, but definitely have a reason why you want to be on the specific team you're applying for. Research goes a long way. And then the second thing they're asking is what skills or value do you as a candidate bring to the team? So after you know why you want to join, you should have a great answer about what you can add to their company, either that they don't have yet or that you know is a huge strength. Um, Other than that, a couple important questions that I think are worth preparing answers to are what are your overall long-term and career goals? Why are you interested, or if you're already an inspector, why do you like being a home inspector? And then last but not least, but very importantly, what is your comfort and skill level with technology? Actually, unsurprisingly, because this is a Spectora webinar, a lot of people in our survey did actually note that they love it when their inspectors know Spectora software. That actually makes them stand out in an application. So make sure you have a great answer about what technology you use, what you know how to use, how you can teach yourself. If they're using Spectora and you're coming from a different report writing software, willingness to learn and use that. And we will provide a full list of sample interview questions after the webinar. With that said, that has been enough of me talking. I hope you all found these survey results as interesting as I did. With that said, I want to pass it over to a true pro in the industry. So we're going to go ahead and share Angela's tips. Angela, just before we dive in, can you tell me about how many people and inspectors you've interviewed in your time at Super Inspector?
Well over 250, maybe 300, easily. And one thing I didn't mention earlier is before I joined Blake at Super Inspector, which is our family company, I was a district coordinator for Aflac, and I interviewed more than handfuls, probably hundreds of people there. Not as many as Lulu, not 1,000, but hundreds of people, yeah.
Tons of experience, and I know you have so many valuable tips to share because we've talked about it. So first, I would love to know, and we've talked about this, what are the 3 biggest pieces of advice you'd give for any inspector looking to be hired?
First and foremost, because looking at your list earlier, I say go to workinggenius.com. It'll be the best $25 that you spend getting to know what your value is. So there's 6 geniuses. It'll tell you the 2 that bring you joy and a couple that are frustrating to you. And so it'll help you answer, what kind of value you can bring to the table. Don't be afraid to share that with your interviewer. But first and foremost, do your research. Know who you're talking to. Look at that company's website. Look at their reviews. Look at all of their social media, which is a huge job these days because we have to keep up with what, 10 of them now. So you look at their TikTok and their LinkedIn and their Instagram and their YouTube channels. So you want to look at all of those things and know, first of all, you want to see if their culture fits you and if you can, and how you can fit into that team. Proofread your resume. Make sure there's no spelling errors. And you know what? I'm so glad that you put on there, bring it with you. Nobody does that anymore. It is rare. That's a whole different way to show up, old school kind of, but it just shows how prepared you are. And to me, it says like, if you've done your research and you're prepared with your resume and you show up dressed, it builds a trust automatically. Because the thing that I want to do is be able to hire somebody. We want to hire people that we can trust. And people do business with people they know, like, and trust. So do your research, show up professional.
Wonderful. I really appreciate those tips. Thanks, Angela. And I think one thing that's really important with doing your research is not only does it show the company you're interviewing at that you care, it will also probably give you a great indication of whether or not you'll be a good fit at the company. So that one's really beneficial two ways, right? You don't want to show up somewhere that you know nothing about. That said, another thing we added about Angela were the most important skills an inspector can have. We talked about this a little bit from surveyed, but I think it's worth going over again. What do you think the three most important skills a home inspector can show up with?
So first is going to be communication. Being a good communicator is just going to take you very far. It's the biggest, most important thing to being a successful inspector, in my opinion. One of the things that I ask when in the interview process is, how do you feel about after hours communication? So I want to make sure that, as a business owner, I want to make sure the client is taken care of. Keep in mind, this is a huge purchase for somebody. Think about, like, if this is their first home, they've got a lot of questions and they're never going to remember everything that you talked about at the inspection. So they're going to be thinking about things on their way home, or maybe they can't make it. Something comes up, they can't make it, and they want to talk to you after the inspection. So being a good communicator about your findings. Also, be able to communicate to different types of people. So you got to be able to deliver the report or your findings to an engineer, or to a teacher, or to somebody's grandmother or somebody's dad. They always hate it when dads come to the inspection. But you got to be able to pivot and talk to somebody in a way that they get it. So it's not always the same for everybody. I recommend even going as far as like taking a body language class, getting to being able to read body language. Know that don't oversell something or over communicate something. If somebody, you can tell if somebody just wants like fast facts or if they want the whole shebang. Next is mindset. So for us, we operate on a yes mindset. We say yes to as many things as we can. Can you inspect that? The answer is yes. Can you do that? The answer is yes. So I would just say having a positive attitude, positive mental attitude, not letting things get you down, and having a yes mindset is a skill that you can develop. Okay, I'm going to throw something weird here. And I was listening to this on a golf podcast, but it reminded me of something. When you make a mistake, people tend to like close up and put your head down. The thing that you have to do is look up and just like brush it off and like, hey, you know what? And learn from that and move on. So I hope that's a good tip. And next would be technology. Just don't overlook the power of technology. You have the best software in the palm of your hand right here. So using Spectora, you're already ahead, but technology. So we're probably going to give you, if you're applying with us, we're going to give you a technology test, and we want to make sure that your technology is top notch.
Yeah, those are all excellent tips. And I love talking about mindset as something that's important, right? Because not just for you as an employee, but you're guiding someone through probably the most
Yes.
consequential purchase of their life, right? If you're nervous, if you're, having a negative mindset about anything, uh that's going to translate, right? And so having a positive mindset won't only just benefit you day to day in your work, but that comes through to a client. So that's so important.
Have a couple of
Um,
jokes. We have one inspector that says the same, and you can say the same thing every time. Is this your first inspection? It's mine too. It's a joke, but it does put people at ease.
yeah, that's hilarious, and I do love that. I think that's all part of communication too. Is just being able to communicate in a way that feels light, not just being a good communicator, but putting your
Yeah,
clients at ease is so. Angela, since
totally.
we've been talking so much about interviewing and you have done so many interviews, I was really curious if you had a story of a really impressive interview that you could share. So would you mind? We talked about an interview you had with an employee. I think you said her name was Kristen, but
Kristen.
if you could share that.
So going back to saying do your research, you know, I can't stress that enough. The thing that in the last year, the interview that stands out the most for me is Kristen. She's our general manager in Maryland, and she was so well prepared at every stage. We do about 4 or 5 interviews, especially for somebody at a high level. But when she met with Logan, he does the screening, and that is on Zoom. She had looked him up on social media. She knew all about him. She knew he was from the Navy, and she used that in her interview. When she got to me, she had looked at YouTube and watched videos from back from 2015 even. She talked about how they could use videos at All-in-One to be successful and get to know agents in their area. She looked at my LinkedIn profile, and she used examples. She knew that I'm a foodie and I like wine. And so she said she was and she's a foodie. So she talked about how she was going to institute Foodie Fridays to reinforce the culture, at All-in-One, and keep the culture alive and really build a strong team. So it was an awesome interview. It felt a little weird, sometimes when somebody has looked at so many things, of researched you, but it was at the same time, we're like, who is this person's awesome. It was very impressive.
I think that touches on something that's so important is your research, even though you're doing it to be kind, you're doing it to show that you care, it also shows skill, right? It shows some attention to detail. It shows how you might be able to interact with clients, and it shows that you actually care to get to know someone. And I just love that example of her specifically, like, not just talking about how her skills and how they would apply for the job, which she
Yeah.
said she did really well, but also about how to add to the culture, which again, I just want to reiterate, when you're joining, even some of the largest companies in the home inspection space are still family run, owned, and operated. And it's so important to know how you'll fit in there and to show how you can add to some of those dynamics that are relatively unique to our industry. And so I just love that story. So thank you so much for sharing that,
You're
Angela.
welcome.
All right, and a couple other things we talked about, and I think this is a question that I personally have gotten from a lot of inspectors who worry that if they're not, going out and starting their own business, that they're not actually going to be able to grow if they're working for someone else, right? So I love the conversation we had about this, and do you mind just sharing your tips for like how to grow when you're joining an existing inspection company?
Yeah. Number one, be available. What does that mean? It just means that, maybe you don't have an inspection in the morning, or maybe you're just getting started. Be available for that day. Be willing to step in and fill in, like what you said, when needed. That goes a long ways, for the team. Be willing to go outside of your area. Maybe you don't want to drive an hour and a half, but just be willing to step up and do the things that others won't. It just sounds simple, but one thing that I also be transparent and be willing to share. I meant to say that earlier, but that might not go with this, but set goals. Don't be afraid don't be afraid to share during the interview a personal goal and a professional goal. Have something ready to share. When somebody says they don't have goals, what do you do with that? I'm like, that says a lot about somebody. So have some goals ready. And be an expert in your field. We are counting on you. You're the one in front of the client and the agent. We're counting on you to be that expert in the field and know all about your subject. Also, maybe get your pest license, get your mold license, be like an inspection guru. Listen to podcasts about inspection companies or how others grew their business. One of the things that I noticed, we had a guy here that started, he noticed that some of the other inspectors were struggling in electrical or foundation. So he started a Thursday night training and they just all learned together. And that just showed us his willingness to be an expert and to help the team, but we were able to move him up the chain as well. So saw that his willingness to jump in and help.
Yeah,
And don't be
I love
afraid.
that so much.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, don't be afraid to get on in your community and tell people what you do. Look for agents and builders and build a community inside for yourself as well.
I think that's so wonderful, and I love all of that so much. And even with community building, and the example you shared about the employee you had who taught classes of his own initiative, there's so many different ways to be an expert, right? Like all of you are
Yeah.
home inspectors, each one of you bring a different expertise to the table. I can guarantee that. So play to your strengths with this. If you're an expert in client communication, if you're an expert in making sure a family feels really comfortable during the inspection, or if you're an inspection or an expert in mold inspection, like those are very different expertises and all things you can be a pro in and really apply to your personal growth and the growth of the team you're on. With
So
that
when
said,
you
I
know
think
what,
we're
oh,
Angela. Oh,
all I was
no,
gonna
go for
say
it.
is,
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
no, I just thought when you know what you're talking about, you're going to come across as more confident. And in that, keep going back to that communication piece, the more confident you are, the more at ease the buyers are, is all I was going to say.
Yeah, very well said. Well, I think that's the perfect segue. You've been doing this for so long and so well. You've built a very impressive team at Super Inspector. I just wanted to know any additional tips you had to share with anyone who's looking to get hired, that we didn't cover already.
I highly, highly recommend this book, Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod. It changed my life. It actually exited some inspectors. We do that as a book club every so often. But it's really about taking ownership of your life and being responsible. But it's investing in yourself. So I highly recommend reading, and I would start with that book. You want to be physically and mentally fit. You got to be able to move around on the roof and get in the crawl space. And this job is not just invest in yourself and be physically and mentally fit. I can't say anything more about that. And we do ask about those kind of things during the interview process. Know your goals. And, one of the things that I consider our team is we're in the customer service business. And yes, we do home inspections, but customer service is a key priority for us. I think great customer service is a lost art. And so we're on a mission to bring it back and make it like a star. So people will remember how you make them feel, not always what you said. So be focused on the customer, make them feel confident in the in the delivery of your communicating what you found, and just make them feel comfortable and confident and leaving with the knowledge they need to make a good decision.
That's so well said. And I think that's just the perfect tip to end on, right? Because also when we did the survey, so much of what larger inspection companies cared about was the client experience, how anyone they're bringing on is able to represent their team to a home buyer, to an agent in the larger community. So if there's one takeaway I want everyone to have from this webinar is that that is equally, if not more so important than your ability to inspect a home, right? When you're looking to get hired. I think Angela, you and I talked about this, like this is a choice you make to be customer focused, to be kind, to improve your communication, but it can't necessarily be taught. So it's something that you have to invest in and improve in yourself before you're applying. You can't necessarily rely on someone at a company you get hired at to teach that perfectly. Angela, I really appreciate you sharing all of that, and thank you so much. You just have such a wealth of knowledge, and I appreciate how you communicate it. But that said, I'm also so excited to just have you on, Lulu, and to get to share your tips from, as you said, what, over 1,000 interviews in the past however many years. So with that said, let's jump right in, Lulu.
Yeah, so plus one to everything Angela said. Definitely. I think everything that you touched on, Angela, just absolutely hit home, not just for the inspection companies we've talked to, but also for Spectora.
Absolutely. Wonderful. So Lulu, I think we'd talked a little bit about applying, like what you actually do when you're going to apply. So do you want to just talk through that a little bit, what we have here, the resume and cover letter, all of that good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I think your resume is your first impression of yourself. And if we can't get past that point, you can't display everything else that you have going on. And so your application as a whole, I believe in making it super easy to read, super high quality. I don't believe that your resume is a time to like take chances on graphic design or make yourself pop with a lot of different color. As someone who's scanning resumes, you want to be able to very clearly see why someone would be a good fit, why would they would add value, and have a quick overview on what their experience is and what their skills are. It's old school, but I think like Angela touched on, like a lot of people don't do cover letters. A lot of people don't print their resumes out and bring them to the interview. So when you do things like that, you really make yourself stand out, and showing that you'll go above and beyond and take that extra step to present yourself that way is really it makes you pop. So I believe in really taking the time to go in and drill in on your cover letter, lay it out like why you would be a perfect fit for the company. Like, do your research on the company. Don't just talk about yourself. Say, hey, I am so excited for this chance to apply to Super Inspector. Here's X, Y, and Z of what I found, and let me tell you why I'd fit right into that. And then each bullet point of your resume, go step by step through the job description and the responsibilities, and make sure that each part of your experience details those specific roles and responsibilities. And I really think that highlighting not just what you've done, but the metrics behind what you've accomplished as well. If you were working in customer service before, like what was your customer service rating? If you are coming from your own business or you're coming from a different multi-inspector firm, how many 5-star Google reviews did you create? How many inspections did you do? And then if you haven't heard back on your application, a lot of times people are just busy, and I think you're absolutely fine to jump in and say, hey, like I just want to check in on my resume. I'm really excited about this position. But something that I always appreciate people keeping in mind is that you don't have the job until the offer is signed, and every person that you talk to at a company is probably talking to the person that's going to hire you. So if you're rude to the receptionist, if you're rude to the person screening your resume, or you act entitled to a position or entitled to an interview, that right off the bat is, I think, a negative mark against you.
Yeah, I think those are also important. I especially love and just want to drill down on a sec for the fact that each bullet of your resume should be formatted to meet the criteria of the job description. And this is especially important. Like if you're not coming from a background of being a home inspector before you apply, I promise any other experience you have can be directly applicable to your work as a home inspector. There's this great home inspector, I just absolutely love him out of North Carolina named Michael Zito, and his background was in restaurant management. And when he started his own home inspection company, he has just this great thing he says about treating every single inspection exactly like he would anything at a restaurant. So first of all, the level of customer service, the level of client care, he brought that from the industry. But additionally, he has this whole thing he talks about how, as a waiter, he had to upsell all the time, right? And as a home inspector, that's so applicable. He keeps the exact same practices that he learned from being a waiter and then a restaurant manager in his day-to-day inspection life. And I thought that was so cool. I butchered phrasing it, but he phrases it very nicely. I think he was on the Spectora Spotlight podcast. So you can actually go listen to him say it better than I just did. But I just think that's such an important point is wherever you're coming from, whether it's another technical profession, whether it's the restaurant industry, whether it's the corporate world, you have something very important that makes you stand out that will be directly applicable to your role as a home inspector. Wonderful. I think we talked a little bit about this, Lulu, and I know you know all about interview preparation. So when someone is preparing for an interviewer, what tips would you share? Some of these we've talked about a bit already, but I think some of them are worth reiterating. So what are the special Lulu tips today?
Yeah, I think you're an expert in yourself. And especially if you've had training or you've had experience in something, you can definitely speak to the technical aspect of doing a home inspection or your background. But I think really tailoring it and thinking about ways that you want to apply those things to this specific conversation or this interview, you're packaging yourself in a way when you're interviewing, and you're boiling yourself down to some specific pieces or tailoring yourself to a role. So thinking about how you and your experience and what you want to do ties in to this role, and how you want to talk about it helps you just look more polished during the interview process, or makes it seem like you've prepared and you know exactly what you want, which is really valuable to an interviewer. If you learn about the company, like Angela said, it I think all people who are part of a company that they love have a little bit of an ego aspect to it as well. Like, stroke that ego, tell people what you love about their company, and play to that. But also, that benefits you because you find out about the company, like you guys touched on. But when you do your research about the company, you can tailor your own responses or your own experiences to that specific company. So it really gets your gears turning about how your skills would apply here. And when you show up to the interview already in that mindset, it takes you the extra mile. And not just inspecting homes. Like, I think that's something we see pretty often, not just with people who interview, but people who are starting out in the industry. Is they're like, oh, okay, I'm going to be the best home inspector in the world. And what we've heard before is that the best home inspector in the world might be a terrible home inspection company owner or a terrible home inspector because they can't add in that people aspect or that relationship building aspect. So don't just focus on the inspecting part of it, also talk about the customer service aspects and how you walk clients through something or how you build relationships with agents, because you are a representative of that company as well. I always like to do the mental trick of like Google popular interview questions. Like, you might not be asked them, but it gets your gears turning and gets you thoughtfully prepared for the interview process one way or another. Like, whether you're asked the interview question or not, you'll probably have a bunch of sample responses in the back of your head that you can pull from. And when you've tailored it to the company, I think it creates a very thought out response to questions that if you didn't prepare for, you can't sell yourself as well. Last thing is definitely prepare a bunch of questions to ask at the end. That is really key, is showing interest in the company that you're interviewing for as well. So don't just think about questions that you want to know for the role about yourself, but dive deeper and learn about the company from that context as well.
Yeah, I think that last point, it just can't be said enough how important that is because A, it shows dedication, it shows interest, it shows your investment and curiosity. Those are all very important. But B, an interview is a two-way street. If there's anything you genuinely do want to know about your company you're looking to get hired at, this is the perfect avenue to find out what that says. Like I don't know, I whenever I approach interviews, when I have interviewed for jobs in the past, it's a commitment to where you're spending the next, year, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years of your life, right? And so you want to make sure it's a good fit both ways. So I think that's just so important to highlight. Um, let's talk about like when you're showing up to the actual interview, which I think this is like the stage that can make people really nervous, right? Like the actual interviewing process. What tips do you have to share for anyone who makes it in the door to that stage?
Yeah, you and Angela have covered this really well. How you dress yourself, bringing your resume. But I really appreciate people who show up a few minutes early. I think that don't show up too early. Don't show up like 20 minutes early because then nobody really knows what to do with you. But just letting people know that you're there and you're ready for the interview ahead of time. Um, on time when the interview starts to me can, like if it's in person, can be late. Joining the Zoom room at the exact time is fine. And vulnerability, I think, goes a long way as well. There's oversharing, and you have to be mindful of that during the interview process. But just calling out, like, I've been so excited about this that I'm really nervous. So I'm sorry if I stumble in the beginning. But I think that if you call it out yourself or you acknowledge it, it shows your ability to have that self-awareness about yourself and ease the tension a little bit for both interviewers and interviewee. um, One thing that I think is like an interview pet peeve of mine is when people speak negatively about anything. We all have our perspectives, but if you don't have that trust built yet, if you don't have a relationship built, I have no way of discerning whether you like there's total merit to what you're talking about as far as the negative things that you're speaking to, or if you're just a negative person. And when you're presenting that self or choosing to present yourself that way, it just doesn't, it's not a good look and it's unprofessional, especially speaking about clients or past employers. That it's there's just never a context where it ever lands well. So staying positive throughout, keeping your ego to a minimum, even if you think you have the job in the bag, even if you think you could do it in your sleep, still showing that you're humble, you're here to learn, you always have ways to grow and you're excited to do that with that company. And keeping the conversation alive yourself. That two-sided conversation, I've been on interviews where it's been like pulling teeth trying to get someone to open up or talk a little bit more. Even if you're nervous, I know it's hard, but giving them just one word responses and not expanding on things. It's show excitement. Don't go overboard and talk for half an hour straight when someone asks you a question. But try to approach this more of like you're not sitting across a desk waiting to be asked questions, like you're going into a conversation in itself. And then even if you feel like all of your questions have been asked or answered during the interview, ask questions anyway, even if you feel like you know the answer. When I get to the end of an interview with someone and they don't have any questions, it's all like, well, I kind of wanted to hear like what you were curious about, or even just like show that thoughtfulness of like, I want to learn more about this company, or I'm curious about these things. So have questions prepped, like I said before, and ask questions even if you feel like you don't have anything. And if you don't have a question, just ask what next steps are, ask what the rest of the process looks like, and try to set that tone.
Yeah, all of that is so important, so wonderful. And I think especially that stay positive piece is so important because again, sometimes if you're leaving a previous job, for example, because you had a negative experience with your past employer or something like that, it can feel like you want to bring that up during the interview, but as Lulu just said, like no one has context for that. They don't know if you are showing up negative every single day or if it really was a rough experience. So I would say if you can find ways to, answer questions honestly, but still have a positive outlook for them, that's your key to winning. That said, couple last things, and we've touched on this a tiny bit, but after an interview, you want to follow up maybe you're expecting to hear from a company and it's just been radio silence. So what do you recommend in terms of like follow up after you've completed an interview or an interview process?
Yeah, so I really appreciate that old school touch of a thank you note. And I think nowadays it comes in the form of an email. So I really appreciate when I hear from someone within a few hours or up to a day of their interview, just thanking them or thanking whoever interviewed them or the team that interviewed them and listing out like what they've appreciated about the process, what they appreciated about the interview and what they learned. And just a follow up again of like, here's why I think I'd be a great fit. I want to tie this back to the things that we talked about. And then if you've said that, what are next steps or when can I expect to hear from you expectation from the last slide? You should have a pretty good idea of when you'll be hearing back from the company. And if that deadline passes, people get busy. I think one thing I've learned in life and in the hiring process is people think about you a lot less than you think about yourself. So it's not like a personal affront if you've fallen through the cracks or if people get a little busy, but it's absolutely fine to follow up after a couple of days and say, hey, haven't heard back from you guys. Just wanted to check in. I want to reiterate, this is my top choice. I'm thrilled about this and I want to get the process moving. If you don't get the job, staying gracious there too. You're not going to get every job that you apply for, and you might not be the right fit for some companies, but a great fit for another. So thank them anyways. Ask them for feedback of what could have gone differently throughout the process, so you can learn for the next time. And I think the home inspection world is a small world as well, especially when you're dealing with the big companies. So even if you don't get the job this time, if you have a really thoughtful response and then you implement some of the feedback or you learn from it, who knows? Like you could be interviewing for that company again in a year. One of my favorite people that's worked for Spectora was rejected on the initial interview process and reached out to me a year later and was like, I just want to know, like, you know, I took the interview feedback that you gave me to heart. I've been working at this job and I've applied the feedback. I'm growing, but I can't stop thinking about Spectora because this is X, Y, and Z what I loved about it. And if there's a chance to interview again, I would love it. And we hired her. She went through the interview process again and has been one of our like best employees. So always remember that like that no is just it's a different journey. It's a different path. It's not a failure.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think that actually summarized just two very last things I wanted to touch on with the always saying thank you. Even if you're interviewing at, your friend's company, like the inspection world is small. You might be interviewing at the company of someone you didn't just meet at the start of the interview process, but you've known for years. You may have even worked in the same market if you're coming from the inspection world. Still treat the interview process with professionalism. Still say thank you, thank them for their time, even if it seems like the thing where you might get a job, even if your interview is a casual coffee chat. That does go a long way. And then the other thing is like, yeah, as Lulu said, be gracious throughout the interview process. This industry is small. I talk to home inspectors in Maine who know a home inspector in Texas, who know the same home inspector I talk to in Seattle, because of these conventions, because of this relationships that we build, and because it is a lonely industry, so home inspectors are always looking for community. With that said, that gives me a great chance to talk about Spectora HQ, our community. If you want the slide deck from this, if you want to rewatch the recording, you can find that in Spectora HQ in the Growth Hub. I have the URLs on the screen, but don't worry, I'll also send out links to all of this after the webinar. But yeah, with that said, thank you, Lulu. I really appreciate your tips. We have a little over 5 minutes for questions. So with that said, I will stop sharing my screen and we can jump into any questions that they have. So let's see. Questions. I have one from Aaron coming in. Are there any suggestions for what software to use to testing an inspector with a technology test? Angela, that seems like maybe one that you can answer.
I wish I knew exactly what we do, but I know it surrounds something like having them open their phone and get an app, like maybe some of the apps that we use on the job for measuring. There's one that they use for roof pitches and measuring certain things. So I know they want to see if they can, get an app on their phone, open it. just small things like that. I don't know. I will have to ask the team. I don't know what the technology test. Y'all would probably be a better can one thing we oh you were gonna say something is like having them deliver the report. I have them do that to me specifically sometimes. So we may have you open Spectora or something and just inspect a small portion of the house and then tell me about it. So
Yeah, the one thing I would add to that is the best technology test you can give is whatever technology you use. If they don't know that software, like let's say just for example, someone was using a different report writing software than you do, you can probably just fathom something or have them walk you through how they do it in their world. But if you can test them on the technology you use, I think that is best. Lulu, did you have something to add to that? It seemed like maybe.
Yeah, I was gonna say Spectora has a free trial, so they can always sign up for a trial account themselves and practice. We have people do that when they're interviewing, or it makes people stand out if they take the initiative to practice on the software before the process gets started.
Awesome, thank you. I have another question in here from John who was saying, what do you recommend putting in a cover letter and how long? I assume that's how long should it be? Lulu, I think you talked about cover letters. Do you have anything you want to add there?
Yeah, the toughest ones to read have been like 5 paragraphs, single space, 12-point font. Keep it like within a few paragraphs, like 3 to 4, with 3 to 4 sentences each or less. It can be very concise and to the point. But the way that I would format it would be to match the style of your resume, address the person that like the hiring manager or the person who's on the job post or just the team as a whole, and let them know how excited you are for the role. Talk about the things you've learned about the company that excite you, and then talk about why you'd be a good fit for the role. It doesn't need to be rocket science. It doesn't need to be like this complicated work of text. Use ChatGPT, but always make it your own. Like have ChatGPT outline it for you, give you a sample one, and then tweak it to yourself.
that's good advice.
Wonderful.
I can, there's like a handful of people in the last 3 years that have sent a cover letter and I get excited about every single one of them. And I think it's just, um, hearing their excitement and letting them know they're looking forward to the interview. That's the biggest, uh, tip, I think.
Yeah, one more thing that I'll add is that if you're applying to a bunch of different places, don't just use the same cover letter for every single one. Like I can always tell when it's just like a template that you're using and you add one sentence. Just frame it like a letter that you're writing to that specific company.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice from both of you. This didn't come in during the webinar, but on the sign up form we allowed people to ask questions, and one of them, Angela, was, is Super Inspector hiring? So I just want to give a moment to plug that if you are, or where they can find all of the other cool stuff you do, like Super Inspector Training Academy and all of that good stuff.
If you want to get your license, especially in Texas, please go to Super Inspector Training Academy. Um, are we hiring? Gosh, yes, we're always hiring great talent. So, specifically in Vegas, if you know anybody in Vegas, I would love to talk to them. Or if you're willing to move to Vegas, you know, a lot of people aren't willing to move for jobs anymore. And that used to be the thing of the past, but it needs to be a thing of the future again or of now. So Vegas, Salt Lake City, or Maryland, absolutely. I would or Austin. We are hiring. Oh,
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, perfect. Well, we'll definitely send out links for how they can get in touch with you or apply after the webinar. That said, we are at time, so thank you everyone for coming, for great questions. And if you have questions afterwards, you can always get in touch with me, Olivia at Spectora.com, if you want to email me. With that said, thank you, Angela and Lulu, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.